好歡迎大家收睇我嘅葡東嘅頻道啊！咁啊，今日我好榮幸有位全球最好嘅sound processor 嘅品牌 Trinnov 佢嘅 international sales 喺度。I'm very honored, sir. Tom Garrett, you are Trinnov international sales manager, right?
Yes, I am.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Thank you for your time in Hong Kong. First time in Hong Kong, right?
First time in Hong Kong in over 30 years. So for me, it's an honor to be back.
Yeah, lovely, right? In Hong Kong so far?
I love it. I love
Okay.
Hong Kong. It's hot, it's humid, it's a great place to be.
Okay. First question, we start, right?
Of course.
Yeah, in my own opinion, Trinnov Attitude is the best surround processor in the world because I'm a user. Please tell us briefly, what's the difference between a Trinnov Attitude processor and the other brands?
Well, what makes Trinnov unique is our intellectual property. Unlike other manufacturers which rely on off-the-shelf digital signal processing, Trinnov always has relied on its own technology. So we use a Intel CPU, and on top of that we run a custom version of Linux called Trinnov OS. So inside the Trinnov OS we have multiple different software suites running, the most famous of which Optimizer in our own room speaker optimization software. So what you do is you use the Trinnov patented microphone, which has 4 capsules, and that measures the room and the speaker interface, so how that sound is changed by the room. So we measure a combination of direct sound, reflected sound, and then on top of that can also look at the impulse, which is how the speaker and the sound behaves over a period of time. Because most manufacturers quite easily can correct the speaker's frequency response and also volume, but they don't look at how sound decays over time. So for us, how the sound decays over time, which is a net result of the impulse, is as important, if not, and sometimes more important than the frequency response. And this is all down to how the human ear perceives sound. So we've been correcting the impulse response, the frequency response, and since the start. And all we've done is improved Optimizer, our in-house software, multiple times over the years. And at the moment, Optimizer is going through a complete update because, as we announced a couple of weeks ago, we're going to be bringing out a new interface to the Altitude 16 and the Altitude 32 series of processors. This will start in Q1 2026, but this new interface will also have some behind-the-scenes improvements to Optimizer, which will benefit all users moving forward. So, in a nutshell, we have our own technology. We don't rely on off-the-shelf processing. That's what makes us different.
Yes. And it's the software-based in comparison with the other brands' sound processor, right?
Yeah. So what we do is a lot of DSPs which are off the shelf, made by the likes of Texas Instruments and the like, they're typically 32-bit based operating suites. So they have to take a signal and typically compress it to operate on these 32-bit DSPs. Our suite uses 64-bit Intel chips. So we have a magnitude of processing extra on top of what everybody else does. This gives us finer detail, finer resolution, and ultimately a better in-room speaker experience.
That's why that's the best thing I can think of the Trinnov Attitude. We can upgrade it anytime. And there's a very new technology from Trinnov, the waveforming.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
Please explain.
So, waveforming is a technology that Trinnov has been working on now for quite a number of years. I first experienced it in our CEO's house, Arnaud Labrie, in the middle of COVID lockdown. So in Europe, we were allowed to fly from UK, in my case, to France, as long as you did a COVID test before you departed. Anyway, I'm in France. I go into the basement, which is Arnaud Labrie's cinema, and I experience a very early software release of waveforming. And the bit that made it really apparent to me was the decay. Now, let's look at what the biggest challenge here is. So historically, bass is the most difficult part of sound to reproduce accurately. And the reason for the accurate is because the wavelength of bass is so long. Typically, if we're looking at something like 20 hertz, that's a 17-meter cycle. So the room needs to be 17 meters long, otherwise you get reflections, which then cause really unwanted problems in the room. So we're looking here now, not just at home cinema, but at hi-fi as well. Any bass below, let's say 80 or even 120 hertz is a long wavelength, and most rooms suffer from unwanted reflections. So everybody over the years has been using bass traps to try and absorb that reflection. Now, the problem with bass traps is they operate at a single frequency. Every time you double that frequency, the efficiency of that bass trap drops off. So you can't control the bass with analog methods, passive absorbers. So what's happened is we've developed a technology called waveforming. So waveforming, as I mentioned already, applicable for both hi-fi and home theatre. What you do is you have your subwoofers at the front emitting bass. And a lot of people have subwoofers at the back of the room. And typically they do this, they're in phase. So the problem is by having them in phase is you increase the standing waves in the room because they're in phase. So what we do at Trinnov is we've got the subs at the front and we invert the phase. So we don't only just invert the phase, which means they're push-pull. We actually can steer the bass left to right across the room and up and down. So we managed to correct room modes from a seat-to-seat basis across multiple seats. So typically in a room you'll get variances in bass below 120 hertz up to 9 or 10 decibels because of the nature of these standing waves which build up. With waveforming, we are now seeing variance as little as plus or minus 0.98 of a decibel in real-world rooms. So that's less than 3 decibels, which to most human ears is not perceivable difference below 120 hertz. So that's the number one benefit. Frequency response is improved. The other response is now based around what I mentioned earlier, which is the impulse. If we look at an impulse, which is a impulse, now typically the decay of that is related to the frequency and the size of the room. Going back, bass is incredibly long. So normally you get the bass bouncing up and down the room. With waveforming, because we capture those reflections, that reverberation time, instead of being measured in hundreds of milliseconds, we're now into tens of milliseconds. So the benefit of waveforming is, number one, clean, accurate bass with the same frequency response that you would expect without reflections. So in other words, it's clean, it's accurate, it's tight. The other benefit is we don't have any delay or hang on the bass. So when you get a snare drum or a kick drum, they both sound tight. Snare, high frequency, bass, drum, kick, low frequency. So in other words, the bass is tight, and this is because the reverberation time is equal across all frequencies. Waveforming is incredible. You have to experience it to understand it.
Yeah, clean and clear bass more, right?
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The first question is see, Hong Kong is our apartment is very expensive. We go very tiny places.
Yes, absolutely.
So when we are using waveforming, we need how many? The minimum requirement of waveforming.
The number of subwoofers you require for waveforming is a derivative of the width of the room. Okay, Hong Kong, as I know personally, very small apartments typically. So normally in a hi-fi or even a home cinema environment, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. So that's 4 in total is the minimum you need. If you're going to do bigger rooms, obviously you need more subwoofers. But here in Hong Kong, let's be realistic, most rooms you're going to be using 2 at the front, 2 at the back, 2 to emit the planar wave or the cylindrical wave, and 2 to capture it. You can actually work out quite easily how many subwoofers you need. Go to trinnov.com/waveforming, and there it will give you a calculator to work out how many you need for either planar or cylindrical waveforming.
Thank you. But do we have to use the same model, the same brand of subwoofers, the 4 subwoofers?
So that's a really good question. Do you need to use the same? 2 answers. In an ideal world, you would use the identical subwoofer front and back. The reason being that takes out any variables, which is the performance of the subwoofer. But if we step back from an ideal into a realistic world, the rules are quite simple. You want a subwoofer with the same performance, which is the point where the subwoofer rolls off. So if your subwoofers at the front go down to 30 Hertz, which is your -6 dB frequency, as long as your rear subwoofers go down to the same frequency, then you're good to use non-matched subwoofers. If the rear subs go down to, let's say, -40 instead of -30, then that mismatch will give you an imbalance in the waveforming, which is why, to go back to the start, we say use the same. It's easier and safer. The one rule which tends not to be broken is you can't use sealed subs on the front and ported on the rear or the other way around. The 2 natures of the subs means waveforming doesn't work as well as it should. So, take it back all the way to the top of the question. You should use identical subwoofers, but with a bit of care and a bit of effort, you can use non-matched subwoofers.
Compromise.
Compromise. Everything in life is a compromise.
Yes, sir.